Welcome to the Fancounters Celebrity Podcast. My name's Nick. Thanks so much for being here. We know that you've got about 500,000 choices of podcasts to listen to. We're glad that you joined us this week. On the show this week, we've got the ultimate child star back for round 2. Another return guest, Jerry Mathers, will be on the show again this week and next week answering fan questions. In fact, Jerry Mathers had the most write-in questions that we've ever had, and we're going to ask those fan questions to Jerry on this special bonus second interview on Fancounters. Now, yesterday was Halloween. I don't know what your costume was. Do adults dress up for Halloween? Now, I've been asked that a bunch of times. Are you going to dress up for Halloween? And I thought, no, that is for children. I'm not doing that. Now, my 7-year-old twins dressed up as Mal and Evie from The Descendants. What's funny about that is they've never even seen the show. I have no idea why they wanted to be these characters, but for the first time ever, we went out and bought them like the packaged costume and the separate wig. So each costume is like $40, and I thought, man, you got to wear this more than one time. So I think they did get 5 or 6 uses out of it, but for never seeing the show, I think it's a little bit of peer pressure that they were succumbing to be those characters. Now we're going to have to watch the movies and see if they made a good choice or not. A little too late though, right? It's November 1st. It's another Friday. In 2 weeks, we're going to do a podcast that is going to pay tribute to a new show that I found. It's called Jim Florentine. Everybody is awful except you. He's got a podcast that you can listen to. Just search for it. And basically, as he describes it, he's ranting like a raving lunatic. And that's kind of what we're going to do in 2 weeks. We are going to pick up our biggest pet peeves, things that I've been holding on to for so long, including another podcast that drives me crazy. And I'll play some clips and I'll tell you exactly why it drives me so crazy in 2 weeks. Now, if you've got something that's on your mind, something that just bugs the heck out of you, email us at hello@fancounters.com. We will read your rants on the air, on the podcast. I talk like I'm still in radio. I know I'm not. We will read it on the podcast in 2 weeks. So we're going to do our rants, things that just drive us crazy, and we'll do all that on November, it must be the 15th, I think. Yep, Friday, November 15th. So we'll do a podcast rant episode on Friday, November 15th, kind of talking about all the things that drive us crazy, and we want to hear yours as well. So once again, the email address to send those to is hello@fancounters.com. All right, let's get to today's show. We've got the number 1 child star of all time, probably the most successful and well-known child star in all of television history. He's known coast to coast and worldwide for his role as Theodore Cleaver on the show Leave It to Beaver. And he is here for round 2 with us right now.
Coming to you from nowhere near the entertainment capital of the world, this is Fancounters with Nick and Elizabeth on the Podfix Network.
There was this mob of people, and they're screaming my name.
Crazy fans.
Stop following me. Don't come around my house. If you do, the cops are going to be at yours.
If I'm having dinner with my wife, don't sit down at my table. Don't follow me into the bathroom.
Can I take a picture? We're gonna. Oh my God!
I think this guy wants to fight me. Ended up being a fan.
I'm the only one that's ever been on Sam Jackson and lived to tell about it.
Well, guess what? I have a big surprise for you.
That's why we call it Fancounters.
I don't think you're going to last on the air very long.
Jerry Mathers, welcome back to Fancounters. We're glad to have you here. How you doing?
Couldn't be better. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Now, we worked in partnership with the official Facebook group for Leave It to Beaver. It's got over 158,000 members. And in conjunction with them, we've got questions that the members of the group, really wanted to know. So some of these questions are ones that we didn't get to last time, and some of them are from the fans. So let's get started. My first question for you is, when did you become aware of the weight that you as a child star had as being the star of Leave It to Beaver?
No, honestly, I wasn't the main character. I mean, it was definitely an ensemble cast. I mean, everybody, the show was Leave It to Beaver, but, you know, Wally was just as important, and June and Ward. It was, you know, because it was through my perspective, you know, I had a lot more to do in the show, but we were all equal as far as making it popular.
That was one thing about the show. It was actually one of the first of its kind, because you saw that later on with the Donna Reed show, that it was seen through the eyes of the children.
In fact, that was the original concept, was to do the world through the innocent eyes of a child, and how they viewed the world, and how, like, your parents tell you one thing and then all of a sudden they may come back, but, in this circumstance, do something else, or, other people that you would think would do the right thing don't. And, there's always people like Eddie Haskell that always do the wrong thing.
You've said on the show before that a lot of the storylines are ripped right from the writers and those who worked on the show, but I think also the characters. We all know an Eddie Haskell in our lives.
Well, that's the wonderful part about Leave It to Beaver is, in fact, I have people tell me that most of the characters on the show everybody knows, but everybody does know an Eddie Haskell. A lot of people know a Lumpy. And Beaver's friends, Richard and Whitey, and everybody says, I had a friend just like that in high school, junior high, college, or, at my work. But I think Eddie is the one that pops up the most because those are the ones you remember the most. The other people are nice people, so you just kind of say, he was a nice guy, but there's nobody like Eddie.
When we talk about Eddie Haskell, I don't think that Eddie was really necessarily a bad kid. In fact, I think I've heard that Ken Osmond has said this before, that he really just wanted to be stronger than he really was. He kind of put on a mask to make sure that he was in control of situations.
Well, I think that's somewhat true, but I think, Eddie in some ways was kind of a bully. He was, he couldn't really communicate well or get along well with people his own age, and so he liked to bully in some ways the Beaver and his friends, and try to lead them into things and do things. So he's a great character, but it's just one of the people that you meet in life. There are a lot of people like Lumpy. There are hopefully you have a lot of great people like Wally, who's the perfect big brother, and the Beaver's kind of an innocent, and he doesn't realize the traps that the world sets for you as you grow up in life, and it really depends on who you choose as your friends.
Let's get into some fan questions. At the age of 18, back in 1966, you were a contestant on The Dating Game. And actually, a young woman did win a date with you, and it was a great date. You went to London. So everybody kind of wants to know, are those things just for TV, or did you and this girl that won actually go to London?
I did, but it wasn't weird, but it was kind of a complication, is that she had actually lied. And so you had to be, I can't remember whether it was 18, I think it was, and she wasn't. She was only like 17. But somehow she took a sister's or somebody's, some kind of ID. And then when they went to send us, it turned into a huge problem, because sending a minor to Europe, without her parents, because she had said they didn't send the parents. They always sent you with what they called a chaperone, but it was just some person that, basically set up different things for you to do. So it turned out to be not a hassle, but it was just a lot harder than going on just a regular one of those kind of shows.
So you did end up going, but she had to bring somebody with?
Well, they not only did she have to bring in somebody with her, but they had to have an extra chaperone. And there was just, we couldn't go to a lot of, when we went to London, there were a lot of places that they had us going to, like nightclubs and things like that, and she wasn't allowed in a lot of them. So it made it a lot harder to, make it, when you after you win, they say, and you're going here, and you're going there, and you're doing this, and you're doing that. And a lot of those things, because of her age, she couldn't participate in.
So much for a date. I mean, they make it sound like, hey, you went a date with Jerry Mathers. And then you got this huge entourage of people that had to have squashed any possibility of a possible romance?
Well, no, actually it was just one person, but, it was just, she had to be in by a certain time, and there were just a lot of extra requirements because she was a minor. But, she didn't she looked like she was probably 21, in her 20s, but she was definitely not. She was only, I can't remember exactly how old she was. I don't even think she was over 18. Just looked a lot older, and she had lied to him when she took the, I don't know why they didn't ask for a driver's license or something. Maybe she took a sister's, I don't know, because that wasn't part of it that I was involved in. But as soon as they saw her passport, when they went to buy her tickets and found out she was underage, they had a big problem, because they had said, she's going to Europe and da-da-da-da-da, and now it made for quite a thing that she was underage.
I found it kind of ironic that Chewy, Barry Gordon, was also on that show. The same episode.
Yes, that was the thing that you did at that time. By the time we were on The Dating Game, I think it had been on for at least several years, and I don't even know how many. So they were looking for new people that were on shows, and so that's why we were lucky enough to. And you'll see when that time frame of the show comes on, you'll see a lot younger actors, because that show went on for, I think, like 10 or 15 years. It was on for a long, long time.
All right, let's move on to another fan question. What is your most proudest achievement outside of the series?
Outside of the series? Probably going to Berkeley and graduating from Berkeley. That was, always something that was my dad was a superintendent at LA City Schools, and so it was, education was always something I wanted to do. I had a great education because, it's basically the education of the kings and queens of Europe. I had a private tutor from the 1st till the 8th grade. I was lucky enough then to be able to go to a regular high school, so I played on the football team and got into sports. But because of my elementary school, they thought I might have problems getting into a college, and so I went and took the test, and luckily I was accepted. So I did have to go to a junior college to make up a few credits, but I did end up at Berkeley, and I have a degree in philosophy from Berkeley.
Being so young on the show, sometimes you wonder if there's crushes and secret romances going on the set. So people like Karen Sue Trent or Jerry Weil, did you ever have crushes on the girls on the show?
Not really. They were good friends of mine, but it wasn't like, I didn't really see them all that often. They would come in and they would work, but they might only be there for 1 or 2 days out of maybe a 3 or 4 month period. Because, we'd film a show a week, and if they weren't in the next week's show, they wouldn't be there. And if they had a smaller part, they probably would only come in for that day of their part. So I might only see them once a month or maybe once every several months for some of them.
There's a couple questions in Leave It to Beaver that I don't think we'll ever have a real answer. We talked on the last episode about where Mayfield really is. And then the other question that comes up a lot with fans is, what was Ward's career? We got a few clues during the series, but it doesn't seem like there's really an answer. So most people just kind of make up their own answer.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because they never knew if a show might come up where they wanted to say he did something. So they didn't want to put themselves in a box where if a really good show came up from somebody that wrote it, they might say, but Ward would have to be doing this for a living for us to do this show. So that was the reason. It wasn't that they were trying to make it a big secret for any reason.
For my next question, if people don't know exactly what I'm talking about, if you go to YouTube and search Jerry Mathers on Married with Children, you'll find that he did a cameo as himself, which was very priceless. Jerry, how did that all come to fruition? Did you have to audition for that part, or?
They called up my agent. I think it was right after the new Leave It to Beaver, but it's been quite a while back, and it could have been, during maybe the first season or so. But like a lot of things, that one happens to rerun a lot, so people remember it. But I did, not a lot, but quite a bit of work during that time on different shows and a lot of talk shows. And, I was going all around the country speaking about diabetes. And so, I did a lot of live interviews and things like that. So, I was doing a lot of things, but a lot of them weren't like Leave It to Beaver that's been on all that time. So people say, well, how did you disappear? Well, what didn't disappear, I just wasn't doing things in their neighborhood.
And even though you played kind of an animated version of yourself, it did show your range to play other characters.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, people don't realize that, I did the Beaver, but, I played a lot of other characters both before and after. So Leave It to Beaver, though, because it plays, every day since 1957, people think, well, that's him. It's like Marilyn Monroe, she's just one person, and this is who she is, and that's what she does. I've done a lot. I've been everything from a bad guy to a good guy to a medium middle-of-the-road guy.
When you did the role on Married with Children, did you get to do any improv?
Not very much. That's pretty much written, and they're very, very good writers. And every once in a while they come up and they, on different shows, they ask you, "Was there anything else you changed?" And we might talk about something. On that show, I don't really remember if we did or not. But you always read the script beforehand, and you go in and talk with them. And that's the one nice thing. Everyone wants to make sure you're comfortable, and there's nothing that you're not embarrassed about, but anything you'd feel odd about, they can always change it because it's not like it's that big a deal before but once it's on tape or on film, that's it. It's out there forever.
Jerry, we talked about this last time you were on the show, the fact that Leave It to Beaver has never left the airwaves in 60 years, which is crazy that the show is, first of all, that old, but also the fact that people are still watching and still relating to some of these episodes. What does it mean to you that the fans are still watching the show and sharing it with future generations?
Well, it's really nice, and it's something I'm very proud of, and I'm glad that people recognize that it's such a good show. I mean, I know a lot of people say, I wish it was in color, or I wish it was this or that, but it was just a very, very good show for its time, and it stood the test of time. And, every show has, in some ways, a little moral. If you do the right things will happen to you. When you do something that's not, you're going to pay consequences. And it's just the story of a little boy growing up in the United States of America. It's in the 50s, but I think basically it could be any time. I mean, it's a lot more complicated in some ways today for kids because of the internet and a lot of more things that they're exposed to. But, kids have always had the same things growing up. There's always challenges and people that you don't want to really have as friends like Eddie Haskell and people that you do like Gus the Fireman.
Gus the Fireman is iconic. In fact, if I remember correctly, there were 3 different firefighters in the series.
They were all great character actors, and they'd be working on other shows, and they'd write the script, call them up to come over and work, and they'd say, oh, no, I'm on this show for a week or two. So whenever we could, though, we got Burt Mustin, who was a really good one, but at other times he was working, and I can't remember even, maybe married, I don't even remember what shows he was working on, but he wasn't one of the every week actors, but we'd call him up and, the show had been written, so they had some other people also play fireman parts.
Yeah, he was certainly iconic. I think I remember seeing a clip of him on The Tonight Show. It was probably, I think he was on there more than once, but the last time he appeared was the same year he passed away, and he was in the middle of giving an answer and kind of forgot his train of thought, and they cut to a commercial, and that was that. But, he's up there with Richard Deacon. He's been in so many different projects.
They were all really good people. He was really interesting, though, because he had been a salesman all his life and then retired and was just a very active person. And that's why he got into little theater and thought, oh, maybe I could be an actor, and went on to that. So, and they were all people like that. So it wasn't like people always say, oh, I never saw him. How come he was so big on Leave It to Beaver? But I never saw him as a young actor. He was never a young actor.
You're right. He was never a young actor because I think he was like 73 or 74 when he first started acting.
I would agree with you. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know he was up there. I know he's at least in his 70s.
A couple weeks ago, we had Tony Dow on the program, and we talked about the possibility of having Leave It to Beaver colorized. A lot of the traditionalists say, it was filmed in black and white, leave it in black and white, and many people want it colorized. So where do you fall in to colorize Leave It to Beaver or not to?
My feeling is that you give people what they want. So I think that there should be both. If somebody would if they wanted to make like a DVD collection or even put it on the air, if they had some in color and some in black and white. The only reason we didn't do color at that time was because it took a lot longer, and because they were working with kids, they didn't really have that much time, because to light a color set is a lot harder than to light a black and white set. And so they just went, and a lot of shows at that time, color was just coming in 1957. By the end, color was, a lot more of a staple, but we'd already had 6 years and 234 episodes. But it wouldn't bother me if they wanted to make it color. If somebody thinks that, they'll see us in color and it'll make their day, that wouldn't bother me, as long as they did have the option of watching it in black and white somewhere if they wanted. I think the funny part would be getting all the colors right, like all our eyes, and are our eyes brown, or our eyes green, or our eyes blue? Exactly. And that's the interesting story too, because the first day we started the show, it was not winter, but it was fall, and it was raining. And my mom knew that when we went in to shoot the very first day, that my hair was wet. The hairman would have had to dry it, and it would have been a whole big hassle. So she just put that cap on me, and when I walked in, the director goes, "Oh, he's coming home from school. I like that cap." And all my wardrobe, there were like 4 and 5 of every T-shirt, shirt, anything I wore, not just myself, everybody in the cast, in case like the adults might sweat or you spilled something on it. They could never match that hat. Now my dad was at that time a principal. He retired as a superintendent, but he was also a coach, and he had just brought it home, or somehow it wandered into our house, and we never knew where we got it. And the makeup and wardrobe man could never find that exact hat anywhere they looked, and they'd looked for several years because they were afraid that it could get lost, we could spill something on it, whatever. So they were watching me like a hawk every minute, and it was my own hat. And so when the series ended, all the clothing and everything went back to wardrobe, and they said, well, we have to take this. And he said, nope, that's my personal property, and I took it home, and it's in my vault in my house.
And do you think it'll end up in the Smithsonian Museum?
It'll go someplace. I don't know if the Smithsonian will have it, but so I'm sure somebody will take it. But it's just an old green baseball cap. And the funny thing is, most people don't even know it's green because it was all in black and white. So I could basically give them any old baseball cap and say it was it.
It's funny you say that, because on the new Leave It to Beaver series, Oliver had kind of a darkish green hat in season 1. And then season 2, when you came back, it was a brighter green hat. They must not have been able to find the same hat.
What happens is every year we took off probably 3 to 4 months, and so things like baseball caps and a lot of that wardrobe went back to the wardrobe department, and it just sat there. Well, if somebody ran in and needed a hat, they might grab it. So it may have just disappeared between season 1 or season 2 or whenever, and they would just go out and buy another one. Then the original one I have, there was only one of, and they really guarded it, but they didn't worry about that on the new series.
Ever since I found out that piece of information, I've been kind of watching the series, and there's a certain episode when you guys are on the lake and the boat tips over. I am guessing that that's a different hat than the one that you were wearing for the majority of the series.
Yep, because they couldn't afford to have me lose it in the lake or have it get wrecked. So they had a hat that kind of looked like it, but if you noticed, all the things in the lake were shot at a distance. None of the close-ups, when we did close-ups and things like that, we always went back to the original. When I was out on the lake or doing things that were far shots, and they thought, whoever knew that the show would even still be on, they never thought people would get that much into it. But there was, yes, for things like that, they did, and the wardrobe man did that purposely, because if he'd have lost that hat, he'd have been in big trouble.
With the wardrobe man especially, because he didn't want to use your hat in the first place.
Nope, they never did. They wanted to just keep it. In fact, as soon as I would walk off, and I told you it was my hat, so it wasn't like it was part of their wardrobe, which really frustrated them. And so as soon as I'd start to, leave the set and maybe go back to school or whatever, they were right there to grab it for me because they were afraid. I was a kid. I could have just picked it up, ran and had it flown off my head or something, and they could never match it. They tried all 6 years to find a hat that looked like it. My dad was a coach, and so he may have brought it home sometime, but they could not find a duplicate of that hat.
Were you ever handed a Leave It to Beaver script and thought, oh man, how am I going to pull this off?
Well, one of the things is for most of the years of the show, I never read the script because it was read to me, just because it would have taken too long for me to read the script. So we would go in and read it on a Monday, and I would read just my lines. But not really. I mean, I knew that it wasn't real life, so it wasn't like, if I needed any help, I would just go to them and say, well, I can't do this, and then we'd figure out a way to do it. But I can't honestly ever remember that happen. I mean, there were just so many tricks that they could use by moving the camera back or moving it forward, and a lot of things they would write, and then when we went into rehearsal on Monday and Tuesday, if they really didn't work out how they thought it would, because when you're writing, it's easy. When you take it onto a set and have people have to do it, it's a lot harder. A lot of times they just change it.
When you think back to the last couple seasons of the show, especially because at that point you were kind of this middle teenager age, when you got a script, did you kind of sometimes think, boy, this is really kind of lame, because at this point in life, Beaver should know better? Or if you read something like, oh, I've got to wear a bunny costume, at the time, were you okay just doing what you were told because it was just a job? Or did you kind of have that mindset where I'm just going to do whatever they tell me?
Yeah, it wasn't that it was just a job, but that's what you do as an actor. You're given a script, and then you develop a character. And, I'd done a lot of different shows where I played all sorts of kids, both good and bad, before Beaver. So it wasn't like it was some big deal. Now, sometimes they would come to me and ask me, Jerry, if this happened to you, what would you do? Would you do anything differently? And sometimes they'd say, well, maybe I'd do this or that. And sometimes they'd change it, and sometimes they wouldn't. It was a very easy show to do because I was a kid, and it was written, the writers had a lot of children between them. So it wasn't like they were just, making things up the kids might do. Most of the shows were taken from real life. So it was easy to portray things that kids really did.
Hugh Beaumont, who played Ward on the show, actually directed a few episodes. Do you know roughly how many he directed?
Under 20, but maybe 10. But it was just something that he'd always wanted to do, and this was a chance. It wasn't at the very beginning. I don't think he did it probably till the third, maybe fourth season. But it was hard because when you're directing, especially since he was in a lot of scenes, and he had to turn it over to his first assistant director. He didn't know the show well, but it's still hard when you're trying to act in a scene, especially in the long shots and two shots. And not only do you have to think about yourself, but you have to think about all the other actors and what they're doing, and if they're doing exactly what you want them to. As a director, you stand right next to the camera and watch everything, and so you get a much better feeling than being right with people in the middle of it.
What kind of directing style would you say that he had?
I don't really understand when the people say style. I mean, we would walk in, we'd rehearse the show. Actually, on Monday we would read it. Tuesday we'd go in and basically stage it where you knew where you're going to walk, and we'd talk things over. And I never did this, but some of the other people would say, I think on this line I should move, or I want to be here. And the director would set up all his shots. He'd think, okay, for this scene I'm going to have a long shot, I'm going to have a close-up of this character, maybe a 2-shot, maybe a 3-shot. And then the next 3 days we shot. So by the time we did it, we pretty much knew the script and, knew how it was going to go and where people were going to be. So it went kind of fast.
Jerry, I know that if this show were to be put on today, you'd have hundreds and hundreds of people, probably thousands of people that they would consider for the roles of the Cleaver family. But back in the 50s, I don't know how competitive things were back then. Do you know roughly how many people tried out to be part of the Cleaver family?
I think they had, I forget, at least 1,000 people on the job for both Barbara and Hugh, and for the kids they had a whole lot more. They had like 3,000 or 4,000 people. But the reason was it was for Wally and the Beaver and Eddie. And so the interview went on for many, many weeks because they'd say, okay, we like you, but, and you'd go, and then your agent would call you maybe 4 days later or the next week and say, well, they want to see you. And then you'd go back, and then they'd call you again, and then they'd match you up with people, and, they wanted to see how you looked with this guy. And they didn't tell you that guy might be Eddie Haskell or he might be Lumpy, and they just wanted to see how the interactions would work. And the same thing with the mother and father. And then one day we went in and they said, okay, this is the cast. And they said, this is Ken Osmond. It's, he's Eddie Haskell. Frank Banks, he's Lumpy. Hugh Beaumont, Barbara Billingsley. In fact, they shot the pilot with a different Wally. And then after seeing all those people, they had to go back and start the search for Wally all over again.
Jerry, how was your family life similar and different to the Cleaver family?
Well, it was different in that I was the oldest and not the youngest. I have a sister. I have 5 kids in my family and brothers, but I was the oldest of them. My dad was probably the perfect person to raise an actor because he was dealing with kids all the time. He was a coach and then a vice principal and retired as a superintendent of LA City Schools. So he was dealing with kids all the time, good kids and sometimes really bad kids. But, it was a really fun life. I got a great education that basically set me up. I did real well in high school because I had a private tutor. I mean, that's the education of kings and queens of Europe. So, if I was slow on a subject, we stayed there until I knew that subject back and forth. So it was just and I had, basically probably 100 people as parents, because if I wasn't happy there and I didn't want to work, the show wouldn't go on, and that's the truth of any kid. So, I had a really good time on the set, and a lot of people that had kids at home, and they were just happy to, play with me. And I'd throw a ball back and forth and stuff like that, and they made it a very enjoyable time for the amount of hours I spent on the set.
Being one of the younger regular people on Leave It to Beaver, there was a lot of older people around you. So when you think of maybe Tony Dow or Frank Bank or some of the older guys on the show, did you ever go to them for career advice or maybe even personal advice?
Not really, to be honest with you. I mean, they were more like probably friends that you had. Maybe if you were a freshman, you knew a sophomore or a senior because maybe your brother or sister had known their brother and sister or whatever. So they were just good friends, and we were all doing the same thing. It wasn't like, although we had the same teacher, I mean, when we did a scene, it wasn't like they were this and I was that. We were all equals. In fact, we were even equal to the parents, except they had a lot harder because we could only work 8 hours a day. And so they would do all our close-ups, all our long shots. We'd go home, and they would sometimes have to go back, and they'd have to go to the different sets and stuff. So they might work till 8 or 9 o'clock at night so they could do all their stuff to make it up, and they'd have to change their clothes again and the whole big thing. So it was a lot easier being a kid, but it was a very, very fun life. And all the people on the set, the cameraman, everybody, all those people had kids, and they knew how to deal with kids. So they made it really fun to be there.
Yeah, it's kind of like, a school activity, or maybe like you're doing a school play.
But I was there all day, so they wanted to make it fun. They, if Tony or myself or any child actor doesn't want to be there, it's really hard to make it, so they want to be there. So everybody just made it fun. We'd go out, we'd play football outside the set for a while, and cast footballs and baseballs, and just do a lot of fun things. All those people had kids, so it's not like they were in any way worried about kids, not worried about kids, but they knew how to treat kids, and so they made it really fun for us. I mean, I built a sailboat that cost them a fortune. And it was just a little model one because I found a piece of wood and I started drawing on it, and the makeup man came over and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to make a boat so when we go to Friends Lake, I can sail it." And the next thing I know, the prop man got it, and then he gave it to the special effects guy, and the guy in special effects put a rudder on it and a big weight at the bottom, and the wardrobe department made a huge sail for it, and I had this beautiful sailboat that, I was thinking all I wanted was just this little boat.
When you were doing Leave It to Beaver, did you have any interactions or friendships with other child stars of that era?
Honestly, no, but I mean, I would see them at events, but we were always busy. We might talk to them in a line if you were waiting, like if it was a big event, and you had to go through the cameras and stuff, you might stand there. But for the most part, I mean, we were on a set. Even people, there were people on other shows with kids. But, I mean, we were busy. I mean, we were either working, we were in school. Tony and I used to go outside, and with some of, like Ken Osmond and Frank Bank and some of the crew members would throw footballs and baseballs around. But, I mean, it was a job, and there wasn't a lot of really free time between going to school and going on the set.
I was a fan of the new Leave It to Beaver show. That show premiered in the mid to late 80s. I always wondered, did you guys ever hide Easter eggs in that show that kind of were hidden things for us to find as fans that revert back to the original series? Not
really. I mean, if there was something that was very obvious or something that we thought would be good, but I mean, it wasn't like we had to put one in every scene or even every episode. There were things that we would say, like, Tony Dow and I might say, "Oh, you know what? In the original show, if this was that," and they'd go back and look it up and say, "Oh yeah, you guys are right," But there wasn't a whole lot of that. I mean, it was a very happy set, and everybody was glad to be working. And actually, Tony and I learned a good lesson because when we were doing the original show, we were either there from 9 to 6 or 8 to 5. When you're adult, then you go back and do all your close-ups, and you could be there till 10 or 11 at night. And that's what Hugh Beaumont and Barbara Billingsley and all the adult actors had been doing on the original show. So we learned out how much tougher it is to work with kids.
And you get that part of it where you're the adult now and you're working the later hours.
You're working the later hours, and you also get the earlier calls because the kids can't be there till 8 o'clock in the morning. So you get the 7 o'clock call to be in makeup and wardrobe so that when the kids come in, you'll be out of there.
And then you're able to go on set with them if you have a wide shot with them.
Right, yeah. But, the children can only work either 8 to 5 or 9 to 6. And to go over even after 6 o'clock, you have to get special permission and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's very, very well regulated, but when you're an adult actor, then sometimes you'll film all the long shots, and then the kids get their close-ups, and then they go on to the next set. So you can be there till very, very late at night because the adult actors can be there all night for all they care.
I did notice that you followed in Hugh Beaumont's footsteps, and you directed some episodes of the new Leave It to Beaver. Was that your very first endeavor into directing?
Yes, it was.
So how does an actor go about directing an episode where you're one of the main characters? You're in scenes that you're supposed to be directing.
It's not really that hard. We had a day of reading the show, and then as a director, you go in with the producers, and when you're reading it, we read it over 3 times on Monday morning, and if something sounded odd or maybe a person was having problems with a word, there might be a word that somebody, for some reason, had trouble pronouncing or something like that, or it was a long speech, maybe it needed to be cut up. And then Tuesday, we would go on to the set. And so I and Tony both, as directors, were really at an advantage because we weren't directors for the first, about, I guess it was 2 or 3 years of the show. So we knew all the ins and outs of each set because all those walls are movable. So we know where the good places to put the camera was, where you could make a fast transition to do the close-ups, where because each director did it differently. If when you come in as a new director, you walk on and you're looking at the set and you just have to figure out everything. We had, both of us had quite a few years because the set was the same as when we were a child, and we knew where all the hot spots were for close-ups, 2 shots, different kinds of staging that you could do.
When I think back to the new Leave It to Beaver, I know the original show was not filmed in front of a live audience, but that laugh track still exists in the new Leave It to Beaver. So I'm kind of wondering, were any of those episodes taped in front of a live audience?
No, none of them were ever in front of a live audience. There were people, like when you're on the back lot, a lot of times the tours would go by. So when we're outside, like at Friends Lake and stuff, you might have buses of people that would watch you, but that was the Universal tours, because when we were there was when they actually opened up the studios to the tours, and before that, you didn't get on a studio lot. I mean, there were no tours. Nowadays people go to Disney World and Disneyland and Universal Studios, but before that was a guarded community. You had to have a pass. If I wanted to bring in another, like say my mom was coming one day and my dad the next, at first we had to get them permission. They had to have a special card. You had to show them a picture, ID. So, I mean, getting on a studio lot was not an easy thing.
Not only was the new Leave It to Beaver a family show, there was family on the show. Tony Dow's son made an appearance. Ken Osmond's 2 sons starred in the show. We did see Frank Banks' daughter, John Snee's brother, and Kalina Kiff's sister on the show. Did your kids have any interest in making a cameo on the new Leave It to Beaver?
I don't think they did. It wasn't that I didn't want them to do it for any reason. I think that's what people always think. But they were always, busy. My son played a lot of sports, and my daughter, they came to the set and they watched me do it. It wasn't like I was embarrassed to have them there or something like that. But they were not really that interested in it.
On average, how many pages was a new Leave It to Beaver script?
I think we used to have 39 to like 40, depending on if there was a lot of action or if there was more talking. It would, but it was around 36 to 39 pages. Now, they could tell that something like if it said, the boys put the boat in the water. Well, that's, like 3 little words, and it takes 2 seconds to say. When you do that, that's probably a 45 to 50 second shot. So, it was all timed out. We went in on Monday and Tuesday and read it, and it was time to make sure that everything, the way we were reading it would be the way we'd read it on the set. So except for things like backing the car out or, going in and out the doors, they had a pretty close idea of how much time that particular show. And on Tuesday, on Wednesday, when we got the new script, they might cut it or they might elongate it, depending on how it read on Monday and Tuesday.
Was the routine of the new Leave It to Beaver pretty similar to what you had experienced on the original show?
Absolutely. We went in on Monday, and we would go in. Tony and I would go to school at about 10 o'clock or 10:30, about, depending, whatever, I don't know what for reason. We'd go to the producer's office, and we would just read it. Now, when I was smaller, I would just sit there, so they wanted me to hear, like, the rhythm of the show. When I was a little bit older, like I was probably, I guess, 8 or 9, then I would read my own part. But otherwise, the script woman would read my part in the beginning, and everybody would and they would time it And so sometimes they would think, okay, it's a little short. Oh, this one's very long, and they'd cut things out. And they would also listen to see if something, like if we would stumble over something, or, when somebody said, well, this is not the way I don't think my character would act, answer, or whatever, they would maybe go back and do it, or they might just say, nope, that's what we think it is, do it.
The new Leave It to Beaver series lasted 4 seasons. When you hit the end of that 4th season, were you guys surprised the show was not going to continue?
No, not really. I mean, it was good, but there was not friction, but Ted Turner and Universal are both kind of people that like their own way, and each one had their own ideas, and so it made it a little more difficult than just having one, company that was in charge and had a set way for the show to be done, and each one thought that their ideas were the best, so it made it a little difficult on everybody.
I think fans were a little surprised to see the show ending because we could see a reason for it to continue, because Beaver was getting married. The son of Eddie Haskell, Bomber, seemed to be getting a regular part in the show. And it looked like that little Kevin, who was Tony Dow's son in the show, would kind of take over that whole Beaver character. When you guys did that 2-part finale for season 4, did you know that was the end at that point?
Well, we weren't sure, because every year that we did it for, I think it was 6 years. So every year we didn't know whether Ted Turner would want it back or somebody else was, So, we were signed to a contract that said we would do it, but we were also signed to a contract that said we didn't have to do it. So each year they'd say, okay, now this season's going to be, 20 shows. We may add a few, and they may have done a few more. When we did the original series, in fact, it ran for 6 years, but we knew that each of the 6 years we were going to do 39 shows. But because it was in color and there were a lot more things on the new show, it was a lot more expensive. So there were a lot more moving parts to people saying, this, who's going to pay for this, who's going to pay for that.
Which also can be a mess at times.
Absolutely, because you're dealing with, Ted Turner, and he's a cowboy. He's a nice guy, but he's got his own ideas, and then you're dealing with Universal, which is old school Hollywood. So, they didn't clash, but they both had different ideas of exactly how the show should work.
You talked about how you directed some of the new Leave It to Beaver, but you also wrote some episodes as well.
Yes, I directed too. So, those are really good opportunities for both Tony Dow and myself. Now, when we were doing even the original shows, a lot of times the writers would come to us, and especially during the rehearsals and things like that, they'd say, Jerry, or even Tony, I mean, it wasn't just me, but when you were reading this or when you were saying it, it sounded a little garbled. How would you change that if you were really talking? And we'd say, well, I'd say this or I'd say that, and why is this word in there? And then they'd write it that way, and of course it was a lot easier, and also it was really the way kids talked. So it wasn't just me, it was all the characters. If they heard you stumble over something, they'd come and talk to you about it, because the writers had all those kids, so they were used to dealing with kids. It wasn't like they were afraid to come and talk to us and say this or that or the other thing and ask us questions about how we felt.
So when you were writing episodes for the new Leave It to Beaver, what kind of process did you use to kind of formulate the ideas and put them all together?
First of all, you have to come up with the premise. And there's always not only the premise, but subplots, And then you have to decide how is each character going to react to this premise, and what would they do. And then if, I was directing, then you have to decide who you're going to pick for, we already had the cast, but there's always different people, so you have to do a lot of interviewing to say, who is, when you read this scene, how did you think this person looked? Was it somebody that looked like this, or was it somebody that looked like that? And you interview a lot of people, and all of a sudden one person will walk in, you go, that's the person. They'd nail it. They'd come in and they'd read the script, and you'd, read it with them. And you'd say, yep, that's the one we're hiring. So it took a week to do each show. We had 2 days of rehearsal, or 1 day of basically reading the script. We read it over 3 or 4 times, and the writers would hear it. And then on Tuesday, we'd come back, and we would block it. And at the end of the day, about 4:30, we'd come in and run the show from building, set to set. And it took about an hour, but because we'd move around. But they would hear it and see where we were going to move, and if there were other characters in it, like Gus the fireman, a lot of times they would bring him in just to see how it played and to make sure there was a rhythm to the show. And then the next 3 days we would shoot. basically shot for the kids, 8 to 5 or 9 to 6, and the poor adult actors, and I learned this on the new Leave It to Beaver, after 5 o'clock when the kids go home, you go out and you have dinner, and then you come back and you work quite a bit because you have to go back to each of the sets and reset up and do your close-ups and things.
So when writing a script, are you also keeping in mind like time management about how long things take, or getting an idea of who needs to be where and when and all that, or is that more of a production responsibility?
Some scenes are a lot longer because, if you're outdoors, it's a lot harder to get all the equipment out there. So you want a lot of shorter scenes in the place, in the house maybe, and you don't want to have as many set moves because, to move from, say, the living room to the boys' room, that could take 30 or 40 minutes because all the crew has to move all the lights and everything over and set up everything. So it's not like it's a live show where you go from one set to the next. With a film show, all the lighting has to be set for each one. So as I say, Monday and Tuesday we'd rehearse it, and the headlight man would be there. He would kind of know how to light it, and when we did it, we'd go on and we'd run it, and he would see exactly where we were going to stand. The cameraman would say, "Okay, I'm going to do a long shot, a close up, and over the shoulder, and this, that, and the other thing," and he would light for those a little bit so it wouldn't take him as long. And then we would do each of those and then move on to the next scene.
Jerry, time is almost up on our first half of this interview. So before we take a break until next week, I want to know if the Leave It to Beaver was still around today, what do you think the Cleavers would be up to?
Well, we did the new Leave It to Beaver, so I don't really think it would be that much different. And the only difference was that we had two characters. We had both Wally and the Beaver playing the war part, and we put a little girl in the show. Wally had an oldest daughter instead of a son, so we tried to bring in the female audience a little bit more. But it was really fun. In fact, when we did the new Leave It to Beaver, we even there weren't a whole lot of them, to be honest with you, left, but we had a few people from the original crew who came back and worked with us, and that was fun because these were people I saw for 39 weeks for 6 years every day, and they were all good friends of mine. It was nice to see them, and it was just a fun time. It was like maybe being able to go back to elementary school and not relive it, but have as good a time as you did then, and just have a lot of friends there, and you know your way around, and everybody's very nice, so it was just a wonderful time.
All right, we're going to take a break right here on the interview. We're going to save part 2 for next week. Be sure to tune in again to Fancounters next Friday when we will upload part 2 of our conversation with the great Jerry Mathers. You can find us on social media if you want to follow us. We're on Twitter at Fancounters Live. You can also search for us on Facebook under Fancounters or our private group, Sharpie Nation. Now, I will be back next week with Jerry Mathers, and the week after that is when we're going to do our tribute to Jim Florentine, and we're going to rant a little bit about various things that are on our radar, as well as a podcast that's driving me crazy. You'll find out about that in a couple weeks. But until then, we hope you enjoyed listening to part 1 of this interview, and part 2 with Jerry Mathers will be here next week. Have a great week, everybody.